All right, so today we're going to run Chris through we're going to run through two tests. We're going to do an RMR, which is a resting metabolic rate test. So he's going to get masked up here in a few minutes, and we're going to have him do the hardest thing he's got to do today, is lay still for 10 minutes. So it's going to give us a base metabolic rate or a resting metabolic rate for which we can do some caloric estimations. We can really use that in nutritional planning. And then we're going to get Chris to jump on the assault bike. We're going to do we're going to find out some ranges for him before the testing actually starts. And I'll show you how we do those calculations here in a few minutes. And then Chris is going to do a test that's going to take between 9 to 12 minutes. It's going to be based on those ranges we set earlier on, and those ranges are meant to bring him to something close to failure. And if not failure, we're going to get some key numbers out of there. We're going to get his max VO2, which is a great number to measure overall fitness improvement. And we're also going to get the point at which he crosses over from fat metabolism, to complete carbohydrate metabolism. So that information is going to be really, really awesome for what we do in the gym or what Chris does on the bike, because it's going to help us to very, very accurately set his zone parameters. So from zone 1 to 2 to 5, we're going to know exactly where those zones take place. All right, guys, so I'll take you through the box or the case that you get from PNOE. The two most important things you're going to have are the PNOE unit itself. So this has been charging for almost 3 hours now. Should be just about ready to go as soon as we see that red light pop up. It needs to be continuously charging or turned on for 3 hours before you run a test. Now you can run subsequent tests and have that the battery pack keep it up to date, but it does need to be on for 3 hours to warm up. The other thing that needs to happen, so if we're traveling, we can attach it to the power bank. The power bank is also going to get connected to it when it's on Chris's back, so that there is no opportunity for it to run out of power during a test. The test duration isn't going to be long enough for that to happen anyway, but it's just a fail-safe to make sure we've always got power. You have these individual filters, which are one-time use only. So we're not going to use those today. We're going to use the regular flow sensor with Chris. That is the other important part here. This is your flow sensor. So this will get attached to the PNOE unit, and then it'll get attached to the mask. So there's two different sizes of masks. We're going to use the medium-large one today with Chris. And there are a couple of different valves. Now, the valve that we're going to use for that large mask, and with the way that we're hooking up the flow sensor, is this middle one, and it's identified by the little post in the middle, and it's also got a post here that the flow sensor will attach to. Chris is also wearing the backpack, which the PNOE unit and the battery will slide into. So you literally can take this unit and go out on your road bike. You can walk around, you can wear it in the gym. You can really do anything that you would want to do to test your metabolic capacity in those exercises, as long as you've got that backpack on and you have the cell phone app close by. There's also some cleaning tubes here. We'll go through a little bit of a cleaning tutorial later. We do have to clean the mask and the flow sensor between each test. So we've got some chemicals to use for that, and there is a really simple to follow process for that. So what I'm going to do right now is we're going to start by putting Chris's mask together. So we're going to insert that adapter into the mask until it's nice and snug. You don't have to over tighten it, but it should be nice and tight. And then we are going to connect the flow sensor to the PNOE. One of the other things time-wise that you need to consider is that this flow sensor needs to be attached to the PNOE for about 10 to 15 minutes to allow it to warm up and the unit to talk to it. I don't understand the process behind it, but it does need to happen. And then we'll go through calibration once we've got that connected for a few minutes. So what we're going to do is take the two cables. Pretty simple and straightforward here. This one cable will go into the round slot, and there is only one way it can go in. So people with better eyes than me can probably look in and see that, but there is definitely one way that it'll slide in and snap. Okay, and there is a little quick release there. It won't come out unless you press that little silver button. And then the other part is the flow sensor has a little hole on the end, and that's going to go onto this white post and click. Okay, so our flow sensor is set up. We're attached to battery power here. That unit has almost been charging now for just over 3 hours at this point, so we should be getting ready to go soon. We're going to let this guy sit for about 10 minutes.
So here's Mike's SOP, standard operating procedure, for doing this test. We're going to give you the short version. I want to tell you exactly what to do without necessarily going into all the science and stuff of this.
Okay, so we've got Chris all set up. We've done our calibration, our ambient air calibration, so we're just about ready to go. The next step is to put the mask and the flow sensor together. So important thing to understand is that one end of this flow sensor is going to go into the mask. So we fitted our adapter that has a nozzle to accept the flow sensor tube. But the first thing we're going to do is look for the end of this that has a rubber ring on it. The rubber ring is going to get input into the adapter on the front of the mask. And if you kind of twist and push a little bit, you will hear a distinct click. And then what you can do is rotate that unit around until you can easily attach the rubber hose. So you don't want to kink that hose, but you do want to have it able to flow freely. And it does sit pretty tight on that nozzle. So you have to be a little bit patient and gentle with it to get it on and off without wrecking the tube. Once we've got that on there, we just want to kind of check and make sure it's not going to come off. And then we're ready to go. So this is our unit that we're going to use with Chris. Just to make sure that adapter is nice and tight. And then I'm going to get Chris to hold the PNOE and the battery pack. And what you're going to do when you come to put this onto your client is you're going to strap the black strap around their neck first, without taking their glasses off. So it's going to sit down around their neck. I'm going to get Chris to fit that nice and tight to his face. And then the blue part, the head harness, is going to come up and overhead. That will slide out. I'm going to sit that right on the crown of his head. Okay? And then this is where if you have a client that you really want to take something out on, you can pull these straps nice and tight. But for Chris, I'm just going to hold his head still, and we're going to tighten those on him. Oh, there we go. So what we want to do now is make sure that if Chris breathes in and then does a forceful exhale, that he's not feeling any air coming out around the sides of the mask. So take a big breath and go. Awesome. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to get your client to put their hand right on the end of that hole, and they're going to do the same thing. So forceful breath out. And there's a little bit there, so we'll tighten up a little bit around there. What we don't want to hear is big gushes of air coming out, but if there is a little bit of residual air that escapes, it's just because Chris's lungs are so powerful. There we go. We're good. Okay. Fun part now is Chris gets to lay still for 10 minutes. So what I'm going to get him to do is lay down flat. We've got a mat set up for him. And we're going to start his Rmr test. So the Rmr test essentially is you can have your client seated. PNOE recommends that they lay down and relax. It's very, very important that you caution your client to do two things. The first one is to breathe normally. So just nice and relaxed breathing as if they're meditating or taking having a little 10-minute siesta. The other thing we don't want them to do, and this is something that was hard for me when I did my first one, was you do not want them to talk. Okay? When you talk, you're actually going to see this on the graph at the end that there will be spikes because the device measures carbon dioxide and it measures oxygen. So if we're talking, we're expelling or breathing in more than we want to. So we want to get a good solid measurement, and that means laying still without talking. Okay? So we'll come back in a second. I'm going to start Chris's Rmr. Now, one of the things that we want to see, if you go on the app that you'll use either on your tablet or your computer or your cell phone, is a measurement here called RER. What we want to do is hit start. So when we hit start, it's going to take a few seconds to connect to the device. And eventually what we want to see is that things start populating in terms of data. And we see an RER value from 0.7 to 1.0. Okay, so we'll wait for that to connect. Okay, we're starting to see some values there. So what will happen is it will take a couple of minutes for it to start plotting some values. The app is connecting to the device. If you're here, I don't know if you can hear it, you can actually hear the device starting to hum a little bit, meaning that it is starting to measure that CO2 and that oxygen. So what we want to do is just kind of keep an eye on those values over the first couple of minutes and look for that RER number. So right now we're sitting around 0.8. And we're going to start his test. All right, guys, so we're going to have Chris do a parameter check. He's going to do his exercise test today on the assault bike. And this would happen if you're going to do it on the treadmill or on a regular road bike on a trainer. So we want to find out how much we want to jump his speed each time that we make a jump. So every minute we're going to do today. So the first thing Chris is going to do is he's going to ride. He's going to keep an eye on his RPM on the assault bike. And we're going to look for a speed at which he's going to get his heart rate up to 100 to 110 beats per minute. That's going to be called our base speed. Grab and bring yourself up there, Chris, so you see 100, 105. Okay, 43. Okay, Chris's base RPM right now is 43. He's getting up in that range of 100 to 110 beats per minute. The next thing I'm going to have him do is go up to a speed that feels like a 6 out of 10 if he were to do that for 4 or 5 minutes. Now you can show your client an RPE or a reading a perceived exertion scale, but basically what we want to tell them is that this should feel like vigorous activity on the verge of becoming out of breath, but he could still, if he wasn't wearing this mask, he could still speak a complete sentence. 55. 55? Right. And then the last thing we're going to get Chris to do is build up to peak speed. So this is what feels like a 9 out of 10 if he were to do it for 2 minutes flat out. Once you've got that speed, you can pull it up. Alright, 94. 84. Alright, so Chris's peak speed is going to be 84. So, we're going to let him take the mask off and relax, catch his breath, and come back down to a resting heart rate before we start this test. The reason we did this was to figure out how many increments we want the test to go, because we could start the same test protocol with 10 different people and have one of them finish at 2 minutes, theoretically, and somebody else finish in 20 minutes. What PNOE recommends is we want the test ideally to take 9 to 12 minutes. It's not really a measure of how much someone can suffer and how long they can suffer for. It's what we want to see on the graphs, which is a measure of max VO2, but we're also going to see that crossover between fat metabolism and carbohydrate metabolism. So it's not necessarily about the duration of the test, it's what we get out of it. So we're going to do a little bit of math right now. We've got this base number, we've got Chris's 6 out of 10 number, which a little secret here, we don't care about this number. So we're not going to use it in our equation. The 6 out of 10 is basically used, as PNOE describes it, to give us a calibration. So if we said to somebody, do a 1 out of 10, and now do a 9 out of 10, there's a lot of context missing in the middle. So that 6 out of 10 really is just to get them kind of thinking about what that effort feels like, that perceived exertion feels like, because some of us are not great at being honest with ourselves about that exertion level, so that does help us to step it up in a reasonable manner. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to take the peak speed, or the peak RPM, which Chris had at 84, and his base RPM, which he had at 43. What we're going to do now is we're going to take peak speed, so 84 minus 43, and that leaves us with 41. So what we need to do now is divide that number by 9. So 9, 18, 27, 36, 45. We're going to go about 4.5, or 4, we'll round it up or down. So we're going to go, 5 RPM change every minute. So we're going to start Chris off also right around his base speed minus 1 increment. So he's going to start at 43. We're going to bring that back down, rounding off that increment to 40. So his base speed, or his warm-up speed, is going to be 40. We're then going to increase him to 45 after a minute, We're going to increase him to 50 after a minute, and we're going to continue on that course for about 9 to 12 minutes or until Chris can't keep up with those incremental changes. That's worth mentioning here. You'll notice Chris had the mask on during his parameter check. That's not necessary, but what we found is that if you've had somebody who hasn't done the testing, wearing that mask can be a little bit claustrophobic. It can take a little bit of adjustment to breathing in that mask. So we didn't actually have the PNOE unit on, but Chris was wearing the mask just to get used to it and feel what it was going to feel like. And so that when the test started, we're not seeing an elevated heart rate because of anxiety because of wearing that mask. Okay, guys, we're going to start Chris's PNOE exercise test now. This should take us about 9 to 12 minutes. One real important thing when you get your athlete ready to go, we've gone through how to set up their test protocol, and we've gotten them all fired up and ready to go for the test. The one thing you want to remember before you get the mask back on your test subject is that you need to calibrate the device without the mask on before they start every test protocol. So it will connect to the unit, it will connect to the heart rate monitor, and then if you forget and put the mask on the subject, you will have to take it back off to calibrate, because if you calibrate with the mask on, you're never going to get that RER value that we're looking for of 0.7 to 1.0. So we've got Chris calibrated, he's on the bike, he's got his bike all set up comfortably, so he's just going to pedal easy right now while we get everything rolling.
43?
Yeah, just hang out around 43 for now. It takes a couple of minutes as they warm up. You can ask them to keep breathing normally. And we're going to start at that base number, 43. It should be fairly easy for Chris. We picked that as a nice low value. He's not even over 90 beats per minute yet. All right, our calibration check is completed, so our test is now going to start. And we've got Chris at 43 for the next minute. Sorry, correction there, the warm-up period is 3 minutes. We're just going to pedal nice and easy. It's going to give us some time to have some looks at our numbers. And again, we want that RER number to be about 0.7 to 1.0. The PNOE does say that there is kind of an acceptable error value there where you have 0.68 to 1.2, but that's acceptable, but we do want to fall somewhere in that range. So we are right at that bottom range right now, that 0.68. We're going to keep going with the test. What we saw in Chris's rest and metabolic test earlier on, so that it just took some time for that to pick up those values and adjust to him breathing in the mask. We're about a minute and a half through our warm-up right now. Chris is sitting at 105 beats per minute. Nice and comfortable. We know he's going to hang out around that 100 to 110, around this range, so nothing out of the ordinary. Our RER value now is 0.71, so we're exactly where we want to be. And more than anything, the 3 minutes is to warm up the athlete, but it is also a chance for the device to kind of catch up and calibrate, like I said, now that the athlete is wearing the mask. You do want to occasionally keep an eye on that RER value. If you see something way above initially or way below initially, then we do want to stop the test and start over. We'll go through that process in another video. Okay, Chris is coming up on 2 minutes on his warm-up. Looking good. Heart rate's holding steady around 100 to 105. For those of you that have done a ramp test before, you know that it's comfortable and easy until it isn't. We're in that stage right now where it's comfortable and easy. Chris is getting comfortable breathing in the mask, hopefully. Yeah. Coming up on our first stage, Chris goes from 43 RPM on his assault bike to 48. In about 2, 1, moving on. Obviously, if you've ridden an assault bike before, you know that RPM number is hard to keep absolute. We want to stay within 1 or 2 RPM of that on either side. And we don't want to have it where he's consistently dipping well below or trying to outrace it to make it easier. Heart rate's starting to come up a little bit now to 120, 121. So 10 seconds left in this stage. All right, we're moving up to 53. Awesome job, Chris. 10 seconds till we move up to 58. All right, moving up to 58. Test looks great. What you'll start to notice or learn about on the app is you'll be able to see Chris's VO2 and CO2. We're seeing a nice differentiation between the two of them. So there's that space between the CO2 and oxygen. It means that he's doing a really good job right now of burning fat. As we get to higher intensities, we'll see that gap close up. So right now, Chris has got a great looking test going. 10 seconds, we're making the jump to 63 RPM. 2, 1, move up to 63. About 30 seconds left in this stage. Breathing as normally, as comfortably as you can. Those big breaths in, big breaths out. 10 seconds left in this stage. Moving up to 68, it's going to be business time soon. All right, 68. Thirty seconds left in this stage. too much gas. 10 seconds now. Moving up to 73. Yeah. 3, 2, 1. 73 RPM. Let's do it, Chris. Seconds left in this stage, and we are done. Good job, man. Breathe nice and easy. Just pedal nice and easy and let yourself recover. Keep that mask on. We're going to go for 2.5 minutes. Just nice passive pedaling. All right, so that was Chris's PNOE exercise test. Our numbers that we figured out were pretty good. So Chris had guessed that max all-out effort for 2 minutes was going to be about 84 RPM. We didn't quite get there. We stopped at 78. But Chris had been riding for several minutes, escalating that speed up and up and up. So I think we did a really good job of doing our parameter check. So that is why a parameter check is important. So instead of just throwing a standard protocol at Chris and hoping that it worked, in that 9 to 12 minute range, we did a really, really good job. So we got in what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I say we nailed it with that parameter check. So Chris was pretty honest with his efforts in that, and that is important. So we're going to hit end test right now, and then we'll let Chris take the mask off, and we will take a look at his report.
So I just got off the bike 3 or 4 minutes ago. We'll throw a screenshot in of what my test showed and what it means, but basically what Mike saw when he was watching the app is like fat metabolism going up and a big separation, and carb metabolism slowly going up, and then kind of reaching this point where it was almost purely carbs doing all the work for me. And that's really, once that happens, like you're close to your lactate threshold. And what I felt was like my heart rate wasn't maxed. I think Mike said I hit 184. My max heart rate historically is like 204. But I definitely hit a lactate threshold. Like everything was stiff, including my arms. I'm not used to the airbike, but that's okay. Like that put me in that put me in the state earlier. So we'll see what the results are, and I'll share them at the end of this video.
All right, so here are the results from the test that I did on the PNOE. And as you can see, I'm in the PNOE app right now. And what this is going to do is going to give me a kind of a ranking on different categories of fitness that the machine measured or calculated. So one of the cool things that you'll see with the app, and it's not really the purpose of this test, but it was nice to see, is that my biological age is 32, which is 15 years younger than I actually am. And so, you know, if we were going just by this test and taking all other markers out of the equation, I would feel super duper good about my health right now, right? So that's very nice. But our goal here was to determine accurately like what my metabolic zones are, when I'm burning fat, when I'm burning carbohydrate, when that switch happens, and when I hit lactate threshold and all that cool stuff, right? That's why we make this investment in the machine and the testing. So let's get to that. So if I'm going through the PNOE app, they're going to give me different standards and even some recommendations on like how they think I should train. But the bottom line here is I want to know what my zones are. So that when I make a prescription or my coach makes a prescription, I can put that into my bike computer, my heart rate monitor, and I'll know when I'm actually working at the point where I'm optimizing the results from that workout that day. Like if the goal of the workout is burn more fat, then I want to be in zone 2 so that I can metabolize the most possible fat during that workout. The workout should be the catalyst for the result that I want to achieve. If I'm working to increase my endurance for a 5K, then I want to spend lots of time in zone 3. And the PNOE is here to tell us exactly what those heart rate zones are for me. It's worth noting here that the value of this test really comes from seeing what my individual zones are. And like the calculations that we share are backed by science, but they're always going to be averages. And so when we don't do this test, we give people a prescription based on averages, like what the average heart rate zone is for people your age, okay? What this does is it lets me dial it in and say, here is exactly what you need to do to burn fat in your body. The other note that you should note here is that this does change over time. And so as I become better at working in zone 2, I become a more aerobic athlete, that zone will actually change. It might drop down to a lower heart rate. And as I improve VO2 max at the other end of the spectrum, that zone might actually change too. So this is a snapshot of what's best for me right now. So here's what's super duper interesting. On the test, I really only got to a heart rate of 189, but I know that my heart rate max is actually higher because it's been higher before. So this top zone of 182 to 189, where I improve VO2 max, how much oxygen my body can actually use in a completely anaerobic environment, I know that it's actually a bigger range than that. So it's basically everything above 182, I'm working to improve VO2 max. And I would improve that through high intensity interval training, really. Zone 4 is actually huge for me. So it's interesting because this is like your lactate threshold, right? How long you can keep going as lactate starts to build up. Now this zone for me is 163 to 182. And that is super interesting because for most people, this is a very narrow window where they get into this zone and the end is coming, right? The clock is ticking. They are going to run out soon. It just means that I can buffer lactic acid better than a lot of people can. And I have to credit like my high intensity interval training, CrossFit type workouts in the past with giving me that extra buffer in zone 4. It also means that I can sustain a near max output for a long time. So I would do better in like a CrossFit workout, but in real life, it means I could sustain a sprint for longer. I could come out of the saddle and work hard in a climb on my bike, or I could like catch a leader if I was swimming or running behind them. Like I'd have like a really good kick at the end of a race, for example. My zone 3, this is actually kind of tiny. So my zone 3 this is like my endurance zone. So where I'm trying to set a good 5K pace, I have a very narrow window there from 155 to 163. It's not a lot. It's very hard to stay in that window, trust me. And so that's probably my biggest opportunity for improvement. And then zone 2, where I am burning the most fat. So this is a combination of like the percentage of what you're burning and the volume. So I'll explain that ratio in a minute. Is 140 to 155, which is actually a higher heart rate than I thought. So at that point, I am working. I would probably struggle to have a meaningful conversation with you. But from 140 to 155, I am burning the most volume of fat, right? The most calories from fat. My zone 1 is actually 128 to 140. And that's like, I'm active, but I'm not exercising. And at that point, I am burning a huge percentage of fat. I'm going to show you those percentages in a minute. But the thing is, I'm not burning a lot of calories. My energy requirements are not high. So while most of the energy that I am burning is coming from fat, I'm not burning a lot of fat just because the actual output is gone. So for me, the optimal place to burn fat is this 140 to 155 zone. So what I wanted to show you was fuel usage. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And what this will do is it'll tell you exactly like what you're burning for fuel at different heart rates. Super duper interesting to me. So we started off at a heart rate of about 105 when I got on the bike, right? So I was like active, but not really exercising. And what this shows me is that 96%, okay, this bottom number here, 96%, there we are, that was the percentage of fat that I was burning. But again, that's just a percentage, right? Like a big percentage of a very low number is still a very low number. So I'm not burning a lot of fat there. But as I go up in increments of 5 beats per minute, what you'll see is I start to burn more and more carbohydrate. So at 110 beats per minute, I was burning 84% fat. And working your way up the table, at 115, I was at 83%. And then at 120 beats per minute, I was burning 75% fat. And you work your way up the table that way. It's really interesting because when you graph this out, you see like where that crossover happens. And so for me, there was this shift that happened halfway through the test where I dropped to burning only 48% fat and 51.75% carbohydrate. And that actually happened at the 150 beats mark. So at that point, I am no longer preferentially burning fat. And at the next point, which was 155 beats per minute, I was only burning 40% fat and 60% carb. And that's where things really started to noticeably change. So that's the top of my zone 2. Everything below that, I'm preferentially burning fat, that's zone 2 or even zone 1. Everything above that, I'm preferentially burning carbohydrate for as long as I can, and that's zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. So this was a really interesting test to take on the PNOE. I thought it was really cool to actually get these metrics. We're going to do a couple of things differently when we do it again. I'm going to do it actually on my bike instead of on the air bike, which I think probably brought me to lactate threshold a little bit earlier than I would have. And we are actually going to test this again later to see, does this change with training? So stay tuned. Hope this helps.